Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much for inviting me to participate. Pull this forward. Okay. I would actually like to start off my comments by doing something I often used as a warm-up exercise in my classrooms, just to make sure that I could kind of survey who is in the room. So would you raise your hand if you are now or have ever been a teacher? And those of you virtually can tweet at me telling me you're a teacher. Would you raise your hand if you are now, have been, or plan to be a parent? Me too. All right. Any of you who is a community member who cares about the schools in your community? Anyone in the room? Okay. Is there anyone in the room who is either now or ever has been a student? Okay. So I think what we gathered from that survey is that clearly, for most of us in this room, I think I'm safe to say all of us in this room, we have an interest in this subject that is more than academic, right? We have a personal interest in this subject. We have a personal experience. And so I filter as much as I really care about the academic work that helps shape my work as a teacher, as a union leader. I also know that tapping into my experiences also helps inform my approach to this work. And so I would also start by saying, in the majority of conversations I have had about this, as a mom, as a teacher, as a union leader, I have found vast agreement on the idea that every child in school should be taught by a strong teacher. That the front of every classroom should have someone who is there to meet the needs of the students. And so I also want to point out, though, too, like virtually every other educational issue, we really can't address this in isolation. And actually, the best solutions out there, you'll see, do not address hard-to-staff schools, teacher shortages in isolation. Recruiting and retaining accomplished teachers to high-need areas means we actually need wall-to-wall accomplished teachers. There is no student out there who deserves the less accomplished teacher, right? We actually need, it means we need to address this idea of wall-to-wall accomplished teachers, which means thoughtful preparation, it means evaluation and support, and it means high-quality ongoing professional development activities to keep an accomplished teaching force in front of our students. It means that we need the skills to accurately diagnose why a school may be hard to staff, rather than assuming, and then making sure that we actually have the resources to apply that remedy for once we discover. So for example, if we discover that a school is struggling with difficult management, it's not going to help the school to remove 50% of the teachers in that school, because that doesn't address the difficult management issue. And it also means rethinking policies, for example, like removing 50% of the teachers that actually contribute to this churn that exists, and it doesn't solve a hard-to-staff school issue. And so let me also continue by saying that in all of my years as a teacher, I've never met a teacher who's left a building because of the student population. And that is my 9 years as a union leader as well. When I would go into schools that were feeling incredible pressure, really depressing school climate, and just were very unhappy in their building, they never wanted to leave the students. Additionally, in the same way, in 13 years of teaching and all the parent-teacher conferences and visits and all of that entailed, I never met a parent who didn't care desperately about their child or their children, right? So with those two things, I think what that means is we've actually got, in many cases, a very powerful partnership addressing this issue in the United States, and in some other cases, we've got the potential for that powerful partnership of teachers and families who can address this. And so it means, though, that sort of partnership, going after those other issues that keep teachers from being able to do their jobs at times. It means working with families for healthy, supportive, strong learning environments. And I want to reflect on some personal experiences. It means the union being able to play a key role in effectively staffing a building and supporting that building of professionals as they meet the needs of students. I want to talk specifically about a couple things I had the opportunity to do as a local president in St. Paul before being elected to executive vice president at AFT. A few years ago, some of you may be familiar with the New Haven contract language that helped restructure schools. And it drove decision-making into the school building that was labeled in need of restructuring, and it allowed for a certain number of contract areas to be opened. So just a little anecdote, once that contract language got approved in New Haven, AFT sent out an email to, I think it was probably to local leaders across the country, just saying, hey, we just did this cool thing in New Haven. So it's a Tuesday night. I'm sitting at my school board meeting, and I notice, I was reading my email during the school board meeting, and I notice this email comes in, and I start reading the language. And one of my organizers is sitting next to me, and I turn my laptop to him, and I said, I think this is the language we've been looking for. By that Thursday, we had it at our bargaining table, and a month later, we had negotiated it successfully, with a few tweaks that are more St. Paul focused than New Haven focused, of course, and we had that language. So what that did is, when a school got labeled in need of restructuring, rather than a top-down approach, which I would say often meant applying a remedy without diagnosing what the problem was, we actually drove decision-making about restructuring schools into that school community so that teachers and administrators and educational support professionals and families could design the restructuring. What we did is we micro-bargained contracts for those sites so that we wouldn't have to pay a treatment to 38,000 students when we were really trying to get at the 400 students in this building, right? We wouldn't have to have 3,000 teachers try something if these 70 teachers or these 40 teachers were willing to try something. And so we would micro-bargain these contracts, and then a teacher would sign an election to work agreement after we bargained to say, yes, I want to continue and I want to do what we have micro-bargained at this site. Or they would say, you know what, good luck. I would actually prefer to go to a building that has the traditional contract rules. And everybody understood that that was just as valuable a part of the process. Because if for example, in a handful of the cases, we negotiated a longer school day. And if that didn't fit your teacher day for some reason, because, you know, for some of us, our daycares, you know, wouldn't open till 7:30, and there was just no, you know, and closed by 4:30, there was just no way for me to stretch my day, you know, as one example. Or maybe you had elder care, or it didn't matter. You could say this, you know, a stretched school day may not fit, I'm going to go to a traditional school day. And so 18 election to work agreements later, where we have tried this in a variety of settings for a variety of reasons, just last year, the St. Paul Federation of Teachers went back to the bargaining table and said, you know what? We actually, like, we've had some experimenting. This is working. This is stabilizing the teaching forces in these buildings as opposed to trying to just remove 20 teachers and see if that fixes anything. And we said, why make a school building wait until they are labeled in need of restructuring? Right? Let's rewrite this contract language so that if a supermajority of teachers vote to access this contract language about micro-bargaining the contract, why make them wait until they have, you know, they've gotten, you know, some regressive label? If they have a really brilliant idea, why not let them work with that idea? Again, you'd need a supermajority of teachers to vote to access that contract language. So it's not an easy lift, right? You are doing some internal organizing in your building. It's not like 3 or 4 teachers could just say, hey, we want to rewrite, you know, our school day and stretch it, or we want to, you know, we want to change this about the budget, or we want to change this curriculum. It takes, you know, it takes a very broad consensus. So we rewrote and won contract language for a 2013-15 contract that said, now it is called redesigned schools language. And so now teachers do not have to wait for that moment where things are just, the school climate is really, you know, suppressed and depressed. They don't have to wait until federal government or the Board of Education or something labels their school in need of restructuring. School redesign is a whole different way of looking at this and actually having teachers anticipate problems that may be coming up and be part of the solution immediately. I would also say, as a union leader, I've now had the chance to visit the Oliver Partnership School in Lawrence, Massachusetts, which does feel like a bit like a pilgrimage to a union leader. This is a school that is a real testimony to the school district administration, who understands the power of working with teachers and our union. It's a place where teacher voice is able to solve problems, create solutions, and really address children's issues. In a school where this kind of trust and partnership have actually been proven to positively impact student achievement. I am going to bet that this is not going to be a hard to staff school as long as these conditions stay in place. These professional conditions are going to be what keep that staff healthy, happy, and retained, quite frankly. And I want to focus on, as a National Board Certified teacher, reflection is a deliberate part of not only earning your National Board certification, but in the practice of an accomplished teacher who's earned their National Board certification. And oftentimes, so what a National Board Certified teacher and others will recognize is the accountability movement, as it has been, has started with the question of, is the teacher doing her job or his job? And I actually think that's the wrong place to start the conversation. It is an imperative question to ask in any accountability framework. But one of the reasons we need a new accountability framework is that we actually have to nest that question in first, is the teacher given support and resources necessary to do the job? That is part of diagnosing any school, let alone a hard to staff school. Then saying, with that in place, is the teacher doing her job or his job? Absolutely, you ask that question. And that's how this is nested into a strong support and evaluation framework. And then the third question, which is a deliberate part of strong evaluation programs, is, are the students learning? Right? And it is a question accomplished teachers ask all the time, sometimes by the minute, right? For those of you who have been teachers, are they picking up this concept I'm delivering to them right now? Sometimes, after a big six-week lesson, right? Teachers are measuring student learning all the time and feeding that back into, am I doing my job? And then that should then feed into the larger question. So these are questions that keep feeding into each other, right? So if I am not doing my job, what support and resources do I need to do my job? So those questions both flow into the accountability framework, and then the teacher and students have those questions flow back out of it as well. And I would also like to talk a little bit about my experience, not only growing up, but my experience as an AFT member watching the American Federation of Teachers become deeply involved in McDowell County. Oftentimes, my frustration with the question of hard to staff schools, or the debate or the discussion around hard to staff schools, is focused on assuming this is an urban problem. This is a problem St. Paul Public Schools may have, that being my home district, or this is a problem a district with 15 high schools has. When this is an American problem, the rural America, when I saw rural Minnesota, this hard to staff schools are an issue both in big districts as well as in some of the smallest districts in the United States. So any thoughtful conversation about hard to staff schools and about attracting and retaining accomplished teachers has to include a conversation about rural America as well. There are many schools and many school districts where we're not talking about the good biology teacher and the bad biology teacher, right? We are talking about a district that is struggling to attract a biology teacher. And if some of you may have seen the recent New York Times story that said we are currently a shortfall of 380,000 jobs in public education. Those are not just urban jobs or suburban jobs. Those are rural jobs as well. And so some of you know the American Federation of Teachers work in McDowell County. It is one rural example that we need to keep in mind as we address the idea of attracting accomplished teachers to be retained in front of our students. McDowell County is one of the poorest counties in the nation. 43 teacher vacancies out of 350 teaching positions on the first day of school. That is a massive number of teachers to attract and retain in a system that, I mean, those are gaps, like huge gaping holes in a system. Those are not like, plug in and Mary Catherine just misses her prep for a few days while they, find another English teacher to join my staff. Those are huge gaps. It is a high poverty, isolated area with limited housing available. So one of the things AFT is doing in their partnership is we are creating an actual teacher village so that we can address, again, you diagnose the problem with attracting 43 additional teachers to McDowell County, and now you apply the right remedy, right? And one of the remedies we've noticed, for example, is a teacher village. So I would say that ultimately, we certainly need to move away from toxic policies that focus on breaking teachers down instead of building us up. Because teaching is an honorable, noble profession of professionals, we need to include teachers in the solutions in these policies. And when we treat them in a way by giving us what we need to do our jobs, addressing the complex problems we are diagnosing, we are going to solve this problem together, and we're going to see really creative, enduring solutions to this problem as well. So thank you very much for allowing me to speak.